One of writing events I attended this last spring was the Dalton-Whitfield County Library Author Fest. My table mate was someone my friend Millicent Flake wanted me to meet, and I'm sure glad that I did. She is our guest today, Kristine Anderson, author of many things, but we're going to talk a lot about her book, Crooked Truth, which was published by Mercer Press. And she's been the winner of several awards related to her fiction writing. So we're going to talk about that as well. Kristine and I hit it off, and I also sat next to her at the Townsend Prize dinner. And I knew she needed to be on the first return episode of podcast after my hiatus. So let's get started. Kristine, welcome to Dialogues with Creators.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Your novel, Crooked Truth, which I read very quickly, which for me says a lot because I couldn't put it down, as they say, and I'm not a fast reader, tells a story of family conflict, but with very unique plot lines and characters. Can you give us an introduction to the book so that the listeners will know they need to read it?
Okay. The book is based on the experience of a 15-year-old boy living in South Georgia in a little rural community in 1948. And it's really, in many ways, a coming-of-age story. This boy, who also serves as our narrator, has the responsibility for caring for an older uncle who is a mongoloid. At that time, the term Downs was not used, and people were referred to as mongoloids. And our narrator, Lucas, is forced to make some very difficult decisions as he cares for his uncle. And that, in a nutshell, is pretty much the summary.
Mm-hmm. And it's rare for a book to have a person with Downs as a major character. And he's not in the book a character who's just there in the background as wallpaper. I shouldn't say it that way, but he's an active person with agency. And that's one thing I liked about the book. He was part of the story, not just someone there. So I definitely want people to get your book and read it. And we're going to talk about the awards it's won and other aspects of it. Before we go any further, tell us about where you live.
Okay. I live in Smyrna, and I've been in the Atlanta area for most of my life.
Okay, very good. Were you born there?
No, I was actually born in Baltimore and grew up mostly in Ohio.
Okay. That's funny because I grew up very close to Baltimore. I grew up in Prince George's County in Maryland. I don't meet that many Marylanders, really. When I was growing up, you didn't go to Baltimore. It was a rough place. So was New York when I was growing up. They've turned that around so that people go there. And I also I went to graduate school in Ohio as well. So what part of Ohio were you in?
Around the Cleveland area.
Yeah.
Where did you go to graduate school?
Ohio University in Athens. Yeah.
My brother went to Ohio University.
Okay, yes. So, didn't know we had that in common. So, how does being a Georgian fit into your writing?
Let me back up a minute, Barbara. I think we are story people.
Mm-hmm.
We're wired to tell stories, to share stories, to listen to stories. It's part of who we are as individuals It's part of our communities, our country, we're story people. It's in our DNA. And I think where we live affects the kind of stories we tell and the kind of stories we hear. So being in Georgia and having a tie to South Georgia certainly affected my setting, the time period, the character development.
Okay, very good. Yes, I think that's an interesting trail that writers could go off on, because I think they often don't realize how they're influenced by their surroundings and their upbringing. My last novel was about Appalachia, and I was not raised in Appalachia, but I was raised by Appalachians. So, and I spent time there. So, yeah. Did you spend time in South Georgia?
We have some relatives down in Stewart County and Lumpkin. So we spend a good deal of time down there.
Okay.
And the story actually, part of the story actually came from a story I heard many years ago at a family cookout on Labor Day. And we traditionally go to this cookout. It's a big event. People from all over the county come. My husband's cousin hosts it, and they cook chicken and ribs, and everybody brings something, and people are parked all over the grounds, and they just sit and drink iced tea and Coca-Colas. They eat all day and talk and tell stories.
Oh.
And I heard this story from an older relative about a couple who had lived in Lumpkin in the 30s. And they had both been widowed, and they both had children from their first marriages. But they got together. She was in her mid-40s. He was in his mid-50s. They married, and lo and behold, they had a little boy. But he was born a mongoloid. And as I said, this was before they used the term Downs. So there were no special ed classes, no programs. He pretty much stayed at home with his family on the farm. And as he got older and bigger, and he was a big boy, as his mother said, he would never hurt a flea. Well, his older half-brother was very cruel and abusive. He called him moron. He called him stupid. He called him dimwit. And their father, who was getting up in years, had no control over this older brother's behavior. And as Robert got older, the abuse got more and more intense. And one day, while the father was gone, things blew up and there was a shooting, and the older brother was killed, shot through the chest. And I won't tell you what happened, but that story was the seed for Crooked Truth, because it was such a disturbing story, and it was one that stuck with me.
Right.
I was working with a little boy with Downs at the time, and thankfully his situation was very different. He was in public school. He was in special classes. He was well-liked. He had great people skills, but he was very limited. But his family was very supportive, and none of the kids made fun of him or called him names. So his story had a much different ending.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that someone would be that cruel to a person with a disability like that.
Yes.
You know, what they obviously had a mental problem as well, to be
And
that
it
way.
wasn't just the older brother. Some of the people in the little community looked at him like a freak.
Gosh, yeah, yeah. Mm. So, okay, so that's quite an inspiration or a seed. I like the term seed more than inspiration for a story. You know, so this is your first novel. Crooked Truth was your first novel, correct?
Right.
Okay. So when did you start to think about the commitment of writing this novel?
I'd been an English teacher many, many years back, and I'd always done some writing. I kept a journal and I did freelance work for some newspapers and magazines, a lot of local articles and some national things. So I always kind of had my hand in writing. But when I retired, I had a little more time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this story that had been kind of rattling around with me and thought, well, this is the time I can sit down and put it on paper.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't an easy process.
Yes. What? So, why do you say that?
Well, I've been writing mostly magazine and news pieces,
Yeah.
and feature articles. So I was used to telling a story rather than showing a story and creating characters, a fictitious community, the setting. I had some idea of a plot, but I did have to create some additional scenes for my plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think writing dialogue, I could get quotes from people, but writing dialogue, extended conversations.
Right.
But I enjoyed that, and that came fairly easily.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you do have a lot of dialogue, and that it works.
Right.
It works very well. So, yeah. And for some people, dialogue is very hard. And I think you have to listen to people, how they actually talk, and you can't be trying to tell the story through dialogue. That's too obvious. You're showing the story through dialogue, but you're not telling, having somebody say, well, this is what happened. Now you show what happened. That's kind of that's the thing we struggle with in fiction. So
it's a fine line.
It is. It's a fine line. Yeah. So about how long did it take you to finish the novel?
It took me probably 4 years.
Mm.
And the novel was not originally titled Crooked Truth.
Mm-hmm.
It was originally titled By Hands Unknown.
Oh.
And that's related to the early incident where the older half-brother was found shot to death, because there was an investigation. And from the information I got from my older relative, his death was attributed to, quote, hands unknown.
Oh, how interesting.
No one was ever convicted. No one was even charged, I think.
Yeah.
So there's a change in the title. There's a change in the main character's name.
Right. Was the change in the title of the book from a publisher asking you that, or your own choice?
It was my choice because of the theme of the book, Crooked Truth.
Yeah.
And the fact that it took place in the fictitious community of Crisscross.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to tie that together, and the narrator's name became Lucas, and Lucas is related to illuminator, light.
Uh-huh.
And his decision to deal with some of the situations in the book, I think, reflects his effort to preserve the light and the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm being a little vague here because I don't.
Yeah. You don't give away the story. Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So
I killed a lot of trees, Barbara.
Yeah.
There's a lot of revision, a lot of drafting.
Yes, I asked the question about process because people want to think of novel writing as being about inspiration and art, but it's also about a lot of hard work that you have to commit to and plan. It just doesn't happen. So
you have to put your butt in the chair.
Yes, you do.
Even when you don't feel like writing, sit down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And maybe if you can't write something new that day, look at what you've written the day or two before.
Right. And we're going to talk about Faulkner a little bit later, but I saw a quote from Faulkner last night. This is, you have to write when the inspiration hits. And for me, the inspiration hits every morning at 9:00. So
yeah,
so you have to get busy. And yes, I struggle with that greatly. So back to, I'm very interested in the character with Down syndrome. How did you create a character as full and three-dimensional, not just as a token? He's very real in the book, and you mentioned your experience with the young boy. Did you do much other research in terms of folks with Down syndrome?
I researched things like causes, Downs and characteristics, problems, because at one point, people with Downs had a very short lifespan.
Yes.
And they were likely to develop heart complications and other problems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their lifespan is much longer.
Yes, it is.
But I'm a great people watcher, and there are more Downs people in the community, I think, than we realize, but a lot of them are, I won't say they blend in, but they're not as obvious.
Right.
And people with Downs have different ability levels.
Yes.
I met a girl with Down. She was probably 19 or 20, and she was she read and write, and she was actually writing a play.
Mm-hmm.
But the little boy I worked with struggled to write his name.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't tie his shoes. He had problems with zippers, but he could ride a bike.
That's interesting. Yeah.
A real accomplishment. And as he got older, he used a cell phone. And he now works part-time at a fast food place, bussing tables, greeting people.
Yes.
Which is a great spot for him.
Right. Yeah. Back when we were younger, it was not, it just wasn't as understood that there could be different levels of Downs. And they're doing amazing things now and going to college and that kind of thing.
Right.
So, also in your career background, you said that you were an English teacher and at college, right?
Well, I started out teaching at a public high school in Duluth.
Okay.
And I picked up my master's, and I taught at Southern Polytechnic before it was part of Kennesaw.
Mm-hmm.
And I've taught a lot of different things over the years.
Yes.
My last gig was actually working in special ed at a Title I school in Cobb County.
Okay. Oh, so you have a very varied experience. Yeah. And you do
preschool.
And you do have a doctorate, correct?
Right. Ph.D.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So I was able to get a better parking place on campus.
Okay. Yeah.
It was one of the big pluses.
Yeah. Sometimes you finish and you do all that work for a doctorate and it's like, okay, I'm done. What's the real payoff here?
Right.
You might get a little more money and things like that. So you were immersed in literature then as an English teacher. So that really helps because people, I'm a firm believer that you can't you can't really write fiction unless you have read a lot of fiction. Some people disagree with me, but you have to know what the good stuff is. And, if you read very limited fiction, I don't see how you can really write it. But some people do, and some people say you can. I don't know.
But I read differently now, Barbara. I read much slower.
Yes.
And I often take notes, and I look at how writers introduce their setting and develop their characters and their plot line.
Yeah.
I used to be a fairly fast reader.
Right.
But not anymore.
Yes. Yeah, I read for the plot and the story, but I also read for the craft as well. Yeah. What are they doing here for this?
What should they be doing?
Yeah. What should they be doing? Do you read very many books on how, like all these books that come out about how to write fiction or how to write a novel or something?
I did initially, because writing a novel was more difficult than I anticipated. I think I was unrealistic. I thought, you've done all this reading, you've taught English, you've written for newspapers and magazines. You should be able to pull this together and get it published. But it was much more difficult than I thought. And as I said, I killed a lot of trees. You recycle.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. How did you get published by Mercer?
I had approached some agents and wrote out the query letters and not had much success. I had a couple agents say, well, send me the first 25 pages, send me the first 50 pages. But nobody said, I've got to have this manuscript. I know I can sell it.
Yeah.
And I had been to it was actually the Red Clay Conference up at Kennesaw, and I met Anne Haidt, and she had published with Mercer.
Okay.
And she mentioned the Mercer contest, the Farrell Sam's fiction competition.
Okay.
And I kind of filed that away in my brain and then went to the Decatur Book Fest. And Mercer had a big tent. And I picked up a couple of their catalogs and got more information on the contest. And again, filed it away. But as I was getting more rejections, the idea of entering the contest became more real. And I actually sent off my manuscript 3 days before the deadline. We FedExed it and prayed it would get to make it by the deadline. And then I started lighting candles and offering prayers. And about 6 months later, I got a call from the editor, and he said, Crooked Truth has received the award. And I was thrilled because I hadn't won anything since the 5th grade pumpkin contest. So to get this prize and to know my book was going to be published, but I didn't realize that my book would actually go into a queue, and it would be about 2 more years before it would be out. Which is one of the negatives about going with a traditional publisher. If you are well known, if you are John Grisham or Stephen King, your book will go out quickly. But for most writers, it's a 18-month, 2-year wait.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Yes, Anne Haidt. She was. I got to meet her at the Townsend thing, and she was very interesting to talk to. And I got one of her books and read it. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
She has just finished a book on this is embarrassing. I can't remember her name. He was the man who was accused of killing Frank was accused of killing a young girl in Marietta.
Okay. Mhm.
And he was Jewish, so there was a lot.
Oh, yes. I know that story. And you're right. I can't remember his name. Leo Frank, I think was his name.
Yeah, that was it, Leo Frank. And I think she got some kind of a grant from the Georgia Humanities program.
Oh, wow.
To write a story about his wife, Lillian. She was from Atlanta. Her family had long roots, and she's actually buried in Oakland Cemetery.
Okay. Yeah, well, that'll be interesting when she puts that out.
Yeah.
So that's not your only award for writing, though. You mentioned a children's book award?
Right. I was involved with the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators because initially the book was intended as a young adult novel. And I was in a writing group and they kept saying, this is not young adult. This is not young adult. But the manuscript did receive a couple of awards from the Society for Children's Writers. And I was nominated for the best debut novel writer a year after the book came out.
Oh, okay.
That was the Georgia Writers Award.
Okay. Yeah, Georgia Author of the Year. They have a category to that. That's right. Yes. Okay. And then you recently won a recognition from in Mississippi related to William Faulkner's legacy. So tell us about that.
Well, Faulkner was born in a little community called New Albany, and they have an award. It's actually an award, a literary award in several competitions. So I entered my manuscript, and it was another last minute rush, but I entered it, and lo and behold, it got the honorable mention, which was like a second place. And I was very pleased because they had over 60 novels. And we actually went to New Albany to accept the award.
Oh, okay. And is New Albany in the northeastern
New
part of the
Albany
state?
is actually about 40 miles east of Oxford.
Oh, okay.
Where you lived.
More in the north.
The northern part of the state, right?
Yeah. That's what I thought. But that's a whole different project.
Right. That was for my new book.
Yeah.
The award was for my new book, and it's kind of a follow-up of Crooked Truth. It has several of the characters, Lucas and his childhood friend, Cotton, who is now going by the name CJ, and Cotton's family, Little George and Corinthia.
Okay. So we'll look forward to that. Do you know when that's going to come out? Anytime
soon, I hope, Barbara.
Okay.
I've got the final revisions sitting on my desk.
And who's publishing that?
I don't know.
Okay.
I may do another contest.
Oh, okay. Entry. Well, since we've heard about your process and everything, sometimes I have visiting writers or poets read from their work. So could you do that for us?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd be happy to.
Sure.
And what I think I'm going to read is a selection from chapter 2. And this actually takes place on the farm in Crisscross. As I said, Lucas, our 15-year-old boy, is the narrator for the story. Everything is written in first person. And I think this is a good selection because it not only introduces Lucas and Robert, his mongoloid uncle, but also the older half-brother, Alvin Earl, who was so abusive.
Yeah.
Cruel. This takes place on a Saturday night, and Robert is singing one of his favorite songs while Granny plays the piano. And she's recruited Lucas to come and join him. As we sang, I heard Alvin Earle come in the back door and poke around the kitchen, searching for some leftover supper. When he couldn't find anything to eat, he came into the parlor and leaned against the wall. He wore a starched white shirt, and his shoes had more polish on them than Granny's piano. He slicked back his hair to hide the bald spot, and I could smell the vitalis from across the room. A little dab of toilet paper clung to his chin, soaking up blood from a shaving nick, and he had a cigarette behind his ear. Granny droned on, and I heard a deep voice announcing tonight's episode on the radio. Fixing my eyes on the mantel clock, I slowly inched toward the kitchen, eager to make my escape. Robert, enjoying an audience, started another round of Clementine and swayed back and forth to the music. He had a high, sweet voice, but little bubbles of spit popped up on his lip when he sang, and he always got the words mixed up. After he finished the last line, Alvin Earle clapped and asked, "You can train a monkey or a dog to do tricks. Which one is he?" Granny jerked her pale fingers off the keys and froze. Alvin Earle's question hung in the air like a bad note, and silence filled the room. When no one answered, he asked again, "Is he a trained monkey or a circus dog doing tricks?" Glancing at Robert, I knew he didn't catch the sarcasm in Alvin Earle's voice or understand his question. He thought it was funny and laughed. "I'm not a monkey. I'm not a dog. I'm your brother. I don't get a word he's saying. He talks like he's got a mouthful of grits." Pulling out his lighter with the one-eyed Jack insignia, he flipped the top open. Then he spun the little wheel around with his thumb until a tiny flame appeared.
Okay. Sorry. My computer went off. Yeah.
That's Lucas, Robert, Alvin Earle, and Granny and Grandpa.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very evocative, very kind of visceral in a way. I really got the body stuff. And one thing about it, it's in South Georgia, and whenever I think of South Georgia, I just think of hot, just hot and sweaty and sticky and everything. And I got a lot of that when I was reading the book too. So it's very evocative of the time and place. So thank you for reading that. So how has these awards that you've won and recognitions, how they changed your view of your writing and yourself as a writer?
I think the awards have been very affirming because, as you know, writing is a solitary effort.
Yeah.
You sit down at your desk, either in an office or maybe a coffee shop, maybe a library, and it's pretty much you and your laptop. You may have a writing group you meet with every week or so, and I think a writing group can be helpful, but writing itself is pretty solitary. So
yes,
the awards were very affirming.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It's like, okay, I really know what I'm doing.
Right.
Yeah, because sometimes you don't think you know what you're doing.
I think the last award, the Faulkner Award, was especially affirming because they had more competition.
It's interesting.
And they had people entering from all over the country.
Oh, yeah, definitely with that.
Even a couple from overseas.
Well, that one would get more involvement too, because it's William Faulkner. But everybody's heard of him. So what advice would you give to writers?
I would say, first of all, read. I would say, remember, this is a long, bumpy process. There's no guarantees. Getting a book published can be a real crapshoot. Just finding an agent can be a crapshoot. So be ready for a long ride, and realize that for me, writing on a regular schedule is helpful. I try to write every morning when things are quiet and I'm fresh. And I think just sitting down and being in a schedule kind of puts you in a place, even if you don't feel particularly inspired, where it's easier to write.
Yeah. So I listened to another podcast called The Habit. It's mostly about writing. And the host always asks at the end, who is a writer that makes you want to write? Do you have an answer to that one? I don't have a good answer myself. If I were ever on his podcast, I'd be in trouble. So...
Well, there are several, Barbara. I like Stephen King, and I think he's been underrated. I think he's very talented and very versatile.
Yeah,
I think he's gotten labeled a horror writer, but I think he's very versatile. I like Pat Conroy, like Ann Tyler. I like Faulkner, and there's a young writer. His name is Ocean Vuong, Vuong.
Oh, okay.
And he's part Vietnamese, part American. And his new book, The Emperor of Goodness, was actually recently picked as an Oprah selection.
Okay.
And I like him because one of the things he said, she interviewed him, and one of the things he said, which I agree with, is writers have to be good listeners.
Yes.
And I would add writers also have to be a bit of a voyeur.
Yeah. Little nosy.
Yes.
No, not a little nosy. A lot. I listen to people talk in restaurants.
Yes.
To get how they talk. Yeah.
I listened to the point where my kids used to poke me and say, "Mom, don't stare. Don't listen in."
Yeah. That's good.
And I like to people watch.
Yeah. You have to observe.
Let me flip the tables for a minute, Barbara, since you're a writer with 10 novels to your credit. What advice would you give to writers?
It depends on where they are in their writing. If they're just getting started, I would talk to them about being realistic, about the process and about the outcomes. And I would talk to them about some of the things you said. You really have to learn your craft. You'll recall we were at that meeting in Dalton at that Author Fest, and there was a woman there who wanted to write a book about her dog. And it was like, okay, sweetheart. But she didn't have any idea what she was getting into or what was involved. And I think that's great. People want to do that, but I would sort of just talk to them about realism. What are they really trying to do? That's what I would do, because it's you really got to believe in what you're doing.
And who are you trying to write for?
Yes, absolutely. Welcome back to Dialogues with Creators. I took a hiatus, as they call it, with my last episode, posting on March 28th. I warned Clemencia there would be a break, and she has been patient with me. I took April and the first part of May off. Shakespeare famously said that April is the cruelest month. I think he might have been referring to the weather or how spring affects the emotions of romance. I do have to say that there are an inordinate number of violent attacks historically in April. You can look it up, and you'll find that Waco, Oklahoma City, the Boston Marathon bombings, the Titanic sinking, Columbines, other mass shooting, and events around the Holocaust happen. So, sorry to bring that up. And of course, it's no comparison, but April is awful on college campuses in the sense that it is overscheduled and stressful on students and faculty. So, no time for writing or podcasting. But for me, it was a time of some recognition at the Townsend Prize dinner on April 16th. That was a very special night for me, and not because I won. Deneen Milner, author of the startling and stellar One Blood, did win. But getting to meet these folks and being considered at least a little in their class of writers made me realize maybe I do know what I'm doing as a writer after 10 books. That's over 1 million words, which I've been told is the standard before you can publish a novel. I guess I jumped the gun, maybe, as do most novelists. We all have to start somewhere. I want to thank the Atlanta Writers Club and the Georgia Writers Museum for sponsoring the prize and celebration. Great group of people. Then I've had multiple speaking engagements from Atlanta to Dayton, Tennessee, and in between. I love to talk to readers. They are who we depend on. And I meet or catch up with lots of old friends. With my retirement approaching, I am looking for more guests for the podcast. I appreciate any ideas you can give me. Musicians, composers, visual artists, entrepreneurs, not just in business, but in other realms. Those who create through ministry, and writers and filmmakers. I have a couple of ideas, but always welcome more. I also hope to return to my Advice for Writers podcasts with some of the questions I've been getting, especially about self-publishing. I keep getting asked what I am going to do after retiring from 47 years of teaching. First, rest. Then rest some more. Help take care of our grandchild. I hope to travel with some established groups, not on my own. I'm looking at a trip to Turkey in the fall that covers the travels of St. Paul. And of course, I want to write. The concept of no more syllabi, tests, grading, and emails about administrative tasks is starting to be real. I've received a lot of great retirement gifts. One of them was a bag imprinted with the saying, "A wise woman once said, 'I'm out of here,' and she lived happily ever after." I hope that's true. For now, I am out of here. I hope you'll listen to Into the Archives and come back for more. Goodbye.